Hello, everyone. Before we get started, I'd like to do a quick audio test. Please type in the Manage Q&A box if you can hear me, okay? Thanks. Hello again, and welcome to our final webinar, How to Be an Effective Supervisor Remotely, of our series, Adapting to COVID-19, Higher Ed in the Transition to Online Learning. We've developed this for college and university faculty and staff to learn tips, tricks, and best practices for this accelerated transition to teaching online and working remotely. Thank you for joining us during these trying times. We hope this webinar series is a useful, valuable resource for you. Please connect with us using the hashtags MCCA webinar, COVID-19, and Better Together, and visit our website for updates. In today's session, our panel will provide specific steps that managers can take without great effort to improve the engagement and productivity of remote employees, even when there is little time to prepare. Students need to be successful during this challenging time. If you have questions, please type them in the Q&A box and we will answer at the end of the presentation. Our presenters today are Dr. Kristina Hubbard, John Lindhorst, and Crystal Berry. Kristina Hubbard is a Senior Director of Strategic Research at EAB. Her research focuses on academic advising and working with various student populations. Dr. Hubbard has spent 20 years in higher education, including 10 years in a community college, where she gained experience in advising, program management, and serving post-traditional student populations. She has taught online for over 10 years and gained experience managing remote team members when she led a college access and success program that served adult learners, necessitating significant remote work from staff. She joined EAB in 2017, where she has continued her research on serving post-traditional students. Dr. Hubbard holds a PhD in education from George Mason University, where she published her dissertation on the role of holistic advising on the persistence of adult community college students. She also has a Master of Education in Student Affairs from Regent University and a certificate in college counseling from UCLA Extension. I will now hand it over to Dr. Hubbard.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me on the panel. I know that these are really, really difficult times for colleges across the United States. And during these really challenging times, I think it's super easy for people to feel either micromanaged or isolated. So I wanted to pull together a few tips for managing your remote teams. These practices, as Kaylin mentioned, were derived from my own experiences. I was able to lead a team of college counselors, advisors, and support staff that worked remotely due to the flexibility that was required to serve our adult learners. And then one of my colleagues actually created a great presentation on having effective virtual meetings. So I wanted to include some of those tips as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so first, we can't overstate the importance of regular communication. Shifting to a virtual environment can make staff feel like they're on an island. Everybody's a little bit on edge right now, so be sure to encourage them to collaborate with their peers. Carve out time for more water cooler type conversation. We've seen a lot of people doing things like virtual happy hours, where everybody at the end of the week gets together for a glass of wine or something like that through Zoom, and just kind of talks about how things are going for them, both personally and professionally. Managers should also be looking for insight from their teams about what's working in this new environment and really what's not. Second, build opportunities to collaborate on solutions. These really are unprecedented times, and many teams are trying to solve new problems on the fly. Try to be more intentional and invite the opportunity to work together to serve students. Schedule team time, where staff report out on challenges students are facing and encourage others to weigh in with other potential solutions. Without a doubt, if one team member has encountered this or has encountered an obstacle, it's only a matter of time before someone else has that exact same issue. So using swarms or groups of people to think through a challenge can be incredibly helpful. Third, as a supervisor, make sure that you're checking in regularly. Every manager should have a complete virtual check-in with each direct report at least once per week. This should be scheduled for at least 30 minutes to set the expectation of depth. Use the time to discuss long-term projects as well as short-term priorities. I know that many of us have kind of found ourselves in a situation where everything that we had planned for this semester has been blown up. So sort of having that time to pull up and reconnect can be really valuable. For you as a supervisor, take away some of the items that you can work on to support your team members. And then also, especially as we're early in this transition, make sure that you're doing a daily check-in to see how things are going and how you can support your team members as they shift into this new environment. Fourth, report on activities. In the program that I managed, we used to use something that we referred to as a Friday 5. It was a quick note that went out to the whole team, highlighting the top 5 items that consumed staff members' mind share that week. This could be individual student obstacles, or it could be something much more comprehensive, like made appointments with my entire caseload to plan for registration. This is also a great time to celebrate wins and make sure that people feel connected to each other on our common goals and objectives. 5, create accountability metrics. This is especially tricky with the time constraints that we're under in this shift to remote work. While I focused on student outcomes such as persistence and success of students on my advisor's caseloads, in today's environment, we need to look at short cycle metrics. It might make more sense to measure immediate progress, like how many students did you reach out to and how many did you actually connect with. These metrics certainly aren't perfect. A call with a student might take 30 seconds or it might take 30 minutes depending on the student's needs, but at least it gives some measure of productivity. And then finally, 6, make sure that you have some kind of tracking mechanism for these interactions. It does a lot in terms of building accountability and demonstrating that productivity. While leadership aren't going to have the capacity to go in and review all those notes, it encourages staff to document their work and build a more coordinated care network with other campus teams to serve the needs of students. And with many of these student success management tools, these systems can also push information up to senior leaders so that they can track bigger issues on campus or trends among students that might warrant some kind of a process change. All right. So while those practices focus mainly on individual accountability and engagement, we tend to be a pretty community-focused enterprise. So of course, there are going to be times that we're doing virtual meetings. So I wanted to offer up a few ideas for getting the most out of those virtual meetings. First, let's consider what's the same about these meetings. For one, the fact that the meeting will not be held in person is no reason to slack off in the preparation for the meeting. You'll need to give it the same level of effort to prepare for these meetings as you would if it was face-to-face. Some would even suggest it actually takes more effort because you might not have the benefit of those visual cues and the rapport that's often built into those few minutes before the meeting actually gets started when you're meeting in person. Second, of course, the participants are likely going to be the same. You'll want to make sure that everybody has the invite so that they can log in on time. One thing that I found kind of interesting was first reported by Dean Dad in a blog published by Inside Higher Ed, but it seems like without the added distraction or lack of predictability of a commute, people are actually arriving more punctually to these meetings. So that's one point, I guess, for virtual meetings. Next, the amount of interaction with folks is also likely the same. You want to invite the same levels of feedback and interaction as you would in person. Similarly, in the same way that you'd want to read a room, you need to find a way to do that virtually to make sure that everyone is tracking the conversation. This can be tricky when people aren't using cameras, but we'll come back to that in just a moment when we talk about what's different between in-person and virtual meetings. You'll notice the next item has a question mark next to it. Many times these meetings are scheduled for the same amount of time that they would have been if they were face-to-face, but we have to understand that people's attention spans can only extend so far. I was on a meeting the other day where it was scheduled for 2 hours, and I found that by the time we were to about 90 minutes, questions had to be repeated, and it became clear that most participants had already mentally checked out. I'm also seeing on Twitter that many people are experiencing Zoom fatigue. So it's a really good time to evaluate whether you need as much time as you thought, or whether content should be broken up across multiple shorter meetings now that people are simply signing in rather than coming across campus or across town for the meeting. Building on that same concept, it's important to recognize who has attended. In a smaller meeting, this might be done with a round of introductions or an icebreaker that replaces some of that chit chat we described as being a natural part of the in-person meeting. Or it could be more intentional inclusion of people as you work through the agenda by having people present their own content or simply contribute to the discussion by calling them out. All right, so what's different? Well, in virtual meetings, the first recommendation I have is that regardless of whether you're hosting the meeting or not, choose where you'll join carefully. Is it well lit, close to your router, free of distractions? It's too easy for us to log into a meeting from the couch while our roommates are watching TV or the kids are playing. Instead, give it the same respect that you would, to the same degree that you would for any meeting that you were having on campus, to the degree that your personal circumstances allow. Everyone knows that many of us are home right now with kids who would otherwise be in school, so complete dedication to a meeting might not be feasible, but use your best judgment and try to minimize the distractions that are in your area. The next piece is the importance of being explicit in setting expectations. Are cameras going to be used? If so, you probably need to notify people before the meeting begins. How do you want people to interact? Should they raise their virtual hands? Should they speak as they see fit? Or do you want to use the chat feature to communicate exclusively in writing? The size of your meeting is going to dictate much of that interaction. The next few recommendations, not sure quite what's happening with the tech right there, but there we go. The next few recommendations here really have to do with intentionality. So use the advantages of, I apologize, we're having a little bit of a skipping around on the slides, but the next few recommendations really have to do with intentionality, using the advantages of web-based interactions such as polling features or trying to engage each person across the meeting so there's no question about why they carved this time out of their day in order to participate, except that there will naturally be some dead space where people pause and process. In addition, there will be those points we talked about before where you want to make sure everyone's tracking the conversation. So you may find yourself with unintentionally rhetorical questions like, does that make sense to everyone? Does anyone have any concerns about that approach? And that silence can feel deafening as you wait. And inevitably, you'll move on just as someone finds the button to unmute themselves, and thanks to lag, you'll end up talking over each other a couple of times before someone just commits to completing the thought. But alas, we have that same thing happen in real-time communication as well, right? The last item here is that you're going to need to summarize the information much more frequently than you would in an in-person meeting. This is especially important when the cameras aren't used because quite frankly, it's easy to get distracted, especially when we're working from home. Cameras help quite a bit in keeping people's attention on the meeting, but it should also be noted that when someone's moving around or has someone come into the room like a child or a spouse, the added motion can be distracting, which brings us full circle to being intentional about where you'll participate in those virtual meetings. So that's actually all the content that I have for you today. Just want to say that for those of you who aren't familiar with EAB, we are a research company in Washington, D.C., and all of our resources have been put into supporting the response for the field of education into COVID-19. So we have a ton of resources that are available right now for higher ed. So before we move on, just want to make sure that people were aware of that. We have expert insights, best practices, and important tools like peer policies and communication examples. This week, we've had a lot of people asking us about the CARES Act and what that means for higher education, grading policies as many people move to pass-fail. And you can actually find other webinars for serving students remotely or conducting a remote meeting. For those who are more readers than watchers, there's also a wealth of expert insights and peer practices that you can incorporate into your own institution, and that site is being updated every single day. So you can check that out at www.eab.com/COVID-19. And now I'll go ahead and turn it over to John.
Thanks so much, Dr. Hubbard. Our next presenter, as she said, is John. John Lindhorst started his employment at Jefferson College in 2000 and has had the opportunity to work in a variety of technical support and supervisory roles in the past 20 years. He has held roles as computer technician, later as a technical support specialist. In 2010, he moved into a role supervising office technology and telecommunications. Today, that role has evolved to include supervision and oversight of campus networking and cybersecurity, end-user technology, and the campus telecommunications, along with a technology help desk that has played an important part in the transition to assist employees and students now working from home. I will now hand it over to John.
All right, thank you, Kaylin, and a big thank you to MCCA for the opportunity to be a part of this afternoon's panel. This afternoon, I wanted to share with you some of the steps that I've taken to oversee the work-from-home transition of the Technology Department's help desk and some of the thoughts that I went through during that transition. Just before Jefferson College's spring break, of course, the decision was made to close our campus due to the growing coronavirus concerns. Like so many other schools across the state, the transition to a work-from-home operation was quick and has provided supervisors with a new set of challenges in terms of keeping the fabric of our teams together and with relevant and timely information flowing. The IT department's help desk is supported by some really talented staff that spend a lot of time supporting our campus technology in a hands-on fashion. With just a day to transition, we were able to keep an 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. help desk accessible to our employees and our students. So much of the credit to our success thus far goes to that team for their flexibility working to provide this kind of support from their homes. During the process of getting the help desk up and running, I tried to consider all angles of impact and how to make the work equitable, fair, and ultimately complete in terms of the support we provide to our employees and our students. Much of the information I'll share in the next few slides are simply part of the process that I went through to get and continue to keep our help desk operational. For many of us, we were asked to transition to this new way of work life, of course, very quickly. Some of you may already be managing logical groups that work on the other side of campus or maybe at a satellite campus. For you, you might already be familiar with some of these ideas. For others, the transition period was quick, sort of a gather pertinent work information and head home with more information to follow. As supervisors, we may not have had the opportunity to direct our staff to gather specific project information or documents before leaving campus ourselves. So some will make the transition to work from home life easy. Others will need a little flexibility and understanding in the process. My portion of this afternoon's presentation centers really on three main points: setting expectations for your team, the importance of staying connected, and then I'll wrap up. I want to share with you some technology tools that might assist you in this transition, as we'll call it managing from home. It's important to set expectations for your team as you try and realize this new, albeit temporary, reality. The first point I'd like to make is that it is near impossible to do 100% of in-office work from home. Take, for instance, a simple trip from your desk to the copier is now no longer possible, or checking in face-to-face on a project is now just simply not a possibility. As supervisors, of course, we're all in the same boat, trying to keep information moving while balancing our own new work and life balance ourselves. I would say that as managers, getting people comfortable with these new routines is an important piece of this transitional time. I would expect that your staff probably wants to work, but perhaps doesn't exactly know how. Think of the kinds of work that can be done when the means of production are locked in their offices on campus. Provide your team with a reasonable amount of work that can be completed in a reasonable timeline given the constraints on their abilities working from home. Flexibility is an important piece of the remote management puzzle as well. Some staff may now have young kids at home or other obligations that will require time away from office work. I would recommend having conversations with your team members individually to understand what kind of roadblocks might be present between them and any kind of work from home arrangements you might be working on. Perhaps they're family related, like I said, and require time just simply away from a computer, but perhaps they're technology related, which is something that maybe your institution might be able to cover with additional support. Do they have access to fast, reliable internet access? Do they have a laptop, desktop PC capable of the work required? In any situation, the flexibility to assign work of an appropriate size given these limitations becomes an important piece of the pace and the expectations you can set for your team. I would consider this one of the few things that as supervisors we actually have in control in this new work arrangement, just the ability to set our own pace and our expectations given all of the moving parts of the new situation. We've probably all given our staff individual and group assignments over the years and know what works and what doesn't. This idea can be moved to this all-digital work-from-home environment, but only if the assignment is clear, it's concise, and it can be easily understood. I kind of liken it to considering yourself a traffic officer for the teams of people that you supervise, so to speak. You're really routing workflows from start to finish, and really the only oversight that you can provide is to ensure that they follow a generally acceptable path on their way to a finalized product or completion. And then, of course, to make sure that the amount of work flowing their direction is something that they're actually capable of being able to do from home. The easiest thing to do may not be the best thing to do in this situation. In the office, it's very easy to divide work simply into fifths, for instance, where each person has the same technology and each has the same type of physical workspace. In this new work-from-home arrangement, consider dividing the work into tasks based around capability in terms of the end result. If you have a staff member that has a lot of high-speed technology available at home, perhaps they are willing to work on documents in, say, Google Docs, for instance, or prepare them for sharing an email distribution, maybe even scanning or digitizing items using their home printer scanner combo unit. Others that have slower internet or possibly a data cap might be tasked to do more offline work, prepping invoices and emailing information just once or twice a day by way of generating Excel data, for instance. The opposite may hold true if you've got a team that meshes well on group tasks. Consider providing a group or a team with a scope of work and letting them consider the best way to achieve success. Instead of requiring the workload to be done in a specific fashion, allow for a flexible end date, perhaps, and for your group to take ownership of the task, leveraging their own capabilities to work together on that common goal or common task. I'll have some communication tools to discuss in a couple of slides that might make this kind of arrangement work well. Finally, something to consider. In the end, and this is something that I took a lot of time to kind of process and reflect on. In the end, equitable work may not necessarily mean dividing equally, but rather by dividing by work capability. Shifting gears a bit to talk a little bit about communication and staying connected. When the IT team began working from home, I immediately missed having that opportunity to chat daily with the team, catching up on their daily details, generally making myself available for conversation and questions. In order to try and digitize this approach without becoming an overbearing presence, I wanted to provide the team with an opportunity to stay updated and feel compelled to reach out to me and communicate, or to reach out to one another when, obviously, since we can't meet in person. I recommend a communication method that you and your team can comfortably rely on as a means to stay connected. This might take some discussion and survey amongst your staff as to what would work best in terms of phone or video conferencing, for instance, or if traditional email might just work as well. There's no need here to throw what might be complicated technology for some on top of this new work-from-home arrangement if the application doesn't fit. Perhaps there might be an opportunity to utilize some of these new technologies after your staff is much more comfortable with their work-from-home arrangements first. On the first day that my team was apart, I gathered the team via video conference to provide them, via telephone conference rather, to provide them with some expectations of work going forward. I communicated to them the role that each member was going to play and that they should expect details to be emailed to them as quickly as I could confirm next steps. Because no one was really prepared at that time with a home office of sorts. During the early days of our campus closure, I was uncomfortable with relying heavily on untried or video technology, things like that, knowing that I could just simply reach everyone via a phone conference for that quick 20-minute call. Since our first day apart, I have communicated with my team on a daily basis via a email digest simply titled Team Update. In the first few days apart, lots of information was being provided to employees on institutional expectations like payroll and timesheets and that kind of thing. We were also receiving a lot of information on general data of social distancing and personal safety. As this new normal sort of set in and we expected that kind of information, the information was then generally made available to the campus community on a more measured time frame via our college's website. I didn't email my staff just so that they could hear from me on a daily basis, but I wanted to share with them some of the decisions that had been made during the course of the day on a help desk level, what to expect tomorrow in terms of new information, and how these decisions might impact our technical services team in the weeks or more to come. I think it's important to empathize with your staff. Although we're all in the same boat, so to speak, as employees, you are possibly the only mechanism for timely updates to their work routines and for updated information. I continue to reach out via email each business day to ensure that all members of my team receive the same information. The point is really to provide parity in communication via a few concise, bulleted points of info, even when there's nothing new to share. There should be no real shame in sharing with your team that you've got nothing to share. A day without considerable changes in information might even be considered a calming presence, given how quickly things have been evolving here in the last several weeks. A couple of takeaways here regarding staying connected. Offering regular communication of any design is a great way to establish rapport and generate some expectations of your team. I also recommend just simply being ready to listen. There will be questions, and probably a lot of questions as individuals think of them. Some questions might need a little time to be synthesized before answering. But just don't be afraid to say that you don't have an answer right now. There should be absolutely no shame in just returning to the conversation with better answers than you did the day before. And then I'd also consider sharing that sort of Q&A in a daily digest, again, to bring sort of parity in terms of communication and information sharing. And then once again, just to remember, we're all in the same boat. There's a strong possibility that many of your staff are completely new to telecommuting in some of these technology instances, simply because they've spent a career of regularly commuting to the office. And finally, maybe one of the most important points in my mind is this is certainly new to many of us supervisors as well. The thing that in my mind I wanted to create was a new set of predictable work and a predictable workload for all of our staff, just simply something that we can rely on and something that our teams can rely on in these somewhat uncertain times. So with all those considerations in mind, there's all kinds of technology available right now that your institution may already be using that can help you bridge this supervisory communications gap. With regards to email, I won't spend too much time at all on email. Everybody knows how email works, what to expect of it. It's a certain way to get information to your team, but only if you've set an expectation of your team to regularly check for new messages. In my case, I've chosen to time the delivery of what I've started calling my daily digest to the team at the end of the business day, usually after the flurry of daily email activity has started to subside for the day. On the topic of teleconferencing, phone conferencing is a great way to get people together, but doesn't lend itself to very large conversations very well. Trying to have a 20-plus person conversation can be difficult over phone, as people's conversations tend to bump in and overlap one another. There's lots of free conference tools available online, and perhaps your institution also has a premium service not listed here that might be available to you. Free conference call, uberconference.com, all of these are listed among some of the higher rated conference calling utilities that are out there and that are popular. A couple of things to be aware of. Be aware that many of these conference calling tools utilize a long distance number. This is really not something that many of us have to worry about in these days of unlimited cell phone minutes. That might play a role in the call availability for some, however, so it's just simply something to consider. These tools often allow 10-plus users to be on a call together for as long as needed. It's just simply the time frame is bookable on the website's dashboard after you create a no-cost username and password. Regarding some video conferencing tools, again, there are lots of no-cost video conferencing tools available. In our case, for Gmail, Google, or G Suite schools, as they're sometimes called, Jefferson College employs Google Hangouts for small groups or Google Meet for larger multi-participant groups. If you are a G Suite school, you likely have these kinds of options available to you right now. You can book a Google Meet, for instance, right from your Google Calendar entry and invite participants. For Live at EDU, 365, or Microsoft Schools, as they're sometimes called, you likely have Microsoft Teams or possibly Skype available for immediate use in the same kind of way. Both have some really great team-based video features that you can get started with using right away. There are plenty of other no-cost options that are similar to free telephone conferencing tools, in that you create a no-cost login and have access immediately to those video conferencing options. WebEx, Zoom, GoToMeeting, a lot of us are familiar with these. They're among the higher-rated third-party video conferencing options that are available out there today. Many of these conferencing platforms allow for you to share your desktop or your screen, which may assist in certain applications where you wish to walk your team through a specific set of screens or steps, software related. And finally, just be aware in the case of video conferencing, there are sometimes limitations. 30, 45, 60 minutes are kind of traditional cutoff times on these free third-party type applications. And finally, one of my favorite tools is the team messaging application. Team messaging is a great way for your group to, without the formality of email syntax and waiting on send-receive process, to just simply communicate and collaborate. Group messaging allows your team to participate in a group chat with the availability of private chat between team members if it's needed. It's perfect for team members to, say, ask a quick question, for you as supervisors to just simply post a 1 or 2 sentence FYI from a supervisory perspective as to maybe some new news that impacts the team directly is needed to be shared. Or just simply working on an issue that might need some real-time response. There's some simple yeses and nos as you're working through some situations. This is a great application for that. For team messaging, Google Hangouts, Microsoft Teams are great tools that, in the case of either G Suite or Microsoft type schools, might be available to you right away. And there are some great third-party options as well. These no-cost third-party options are robust. They offer a similar experience in both Slack and Zulip. They are among some of the more popular third-party applications. Quick story about our instance. My team has had some really great success using our choice of team messaging tool, which is Slack, since we implemented this back in 2017. The statistics that I can see on the Slack dashboard indicate that the IT team sends hundreds of messages each month, and it's really sped the rate of communication for questions and answers to the kind of those simple who, what, and where type questions. It's certainly something that can enhance a regular business operation, but that in these new work from home times, it might come in handy to keep people communicating when they can't visit face-to-face. Or if you think of an instance where maybe a phone call might be too cumbersome, if you just want to ask a simple yes or no, you can just chat it to the group as a whole or in a private session. So just a few more takeaways before I wrap up my part of the presentation. First is to find the application and the process that you're familiar with and then own it. Learn about it, try a demo of it between, say, your phone and your laptop or tablet, get a feel for how it works, and then try it out with the team. Model this use with your team and communicate your expectations for use. If you make the use of a new tool like this optional, you'll likely have a mixed bag of results. Some of your staff may flock to it while others insist on not using it. Remember that each type of communication technology has its own applications. Some tools are better than others. A simple cell phone call between you and another person still might be a better suited technology than anything that I mentioned here previously. The key here is consistency in application of the tool, regardless of really which medium you prefer. A nice feature here, and I specifically picked out a handful of tools that meet this criteria. All of the options that I mentioned here have a variety of Windows, Mac, iPad, iPhone, and Android compatibility and availability. They can be used seamlessly across devices, regardless of what kind of hardware your staff is using at home. They are truly accessible to almost everyone with access to some form of technology. And finally, this is bound to happen, you're certain to hit a few bumps in this adoption of this kind of technology. Just learn to embrace that the change is going to be a little bumpy perhaps. Your path is really to streamline the collective communication with your team. If you ride out those initial bumps, I would expect that it would pay off for you in the end, in hopes that your team will benefit from these efficiencies that these kinds of technologies can provide you. So, thanks for this opportunity to present from a fellow supervisor perspective. I hope you can take a few of these ideas and maybe a handful of tools and share them with your team to help you get through the next few weeks as we adjust to this sort of temporary reality. And with that, I'm happy to hand the microphone back to Kaylin. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, John. Both of these presentations have been great so far. And with that said, our next presenter is Crystal Berry. She is Vice President of 25th Hour Communications, leads a team of 10 for 25th Hour Communications, and works with almost each of the company's 158 higher education clients. She is an experienced media buyer and marketing manager with more than 15 years of experience in the higher education industry. Crystal has presented over the last 10 years to presidents' cabinets, committees, and higher education councils and conferences throughout her career on topics such as cutting-edge technology and social media and digital enrollment strategy, and continues to create and implement award-winning collateral and campaigns for her clients. You probably saw her at our convention this past year in Kansas City. And again, if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box, and we will get to them after Crystal's presentation. I will now hand it over to her.
All right. Thank you so much, Kaylin. Hello, everybody. Like I said, my name is Crystal Berry, Vice President of Marketing and Communications for 25th Hour. This has been so great. I want to thank the other co-presenters for such a thorough, outline and list of essential resources and tips. This has been really great. I have about just only 2 slides to share. Mine are very high level. I really wanted everybody is so busy, and I just wanted to give you guys the best takeaways that I can give you, being a virtual and remote supervisor for over 3.5 years now with a team of about 10, ebbs and flows, kind of, as we've had designers and marketers and copywriters and all of that. So this is not new to me, but I understand that this is the new normal. So trying to kind of dive in and look at some things that I could offer up to you at a 30,000 foot level being a supervisor. So let's just go ahead and dive right on in. This has been talked about a few times throughout this presentation, which is the dangers of micromanagement. Being a supervisor and being in the office gives you a really good handle on, again, reading people, reading the room, reading conversations, and really being able to assign and get those workflow processes in order. What I tell oftentimes, I work with other supervisors that are new to virtual or remote work, and I say, listen, it kind of is like Jello, and the harder that you try to grip Jello in your hand, the worse it becomes. And so, be careful, even though you may not be a micromanager at heart or a micromanager at home, it can be very easy to slide into micromanagement mode when you're managing from a digital platform or from your home in an area that you're not comfortable in. Conversations are now emails. Everything that you could walk across the hall, you could pick up the phone, you could go across campus, you could just kind of shout over, from one desk to another. Those things are not available to us anymore. So just understand that a lot of these conversations are now going to become emails or another form of communication, and we should use them wisely. Normally we would converse and we would be able to talk back and forth. Now having to put that conversation into some sort of written form, whether it be an instant messenger hangout, email, or anything like that, it can get very, you can basically spam each other without even noticing it, and all of a sudden your production is going to kind of go out the window. So use them wisely. Make sure that you're paying attention every time you're emailing. Is that email necessary? Could I combine this email and do a group email? What's going to be when that person responds to me? About how many threads is this going to take to get resolved? And so just kind of taking into consideration how we communicate with each other and really trying to not go down the rabbit hole of micromanagement. Another part of this is trust. We really have to trust our team, and as supervisors, it is our job to keep our team together and to show and demonstrate trust on a regular level and on a regular basis. In times like this, people are very quick to call each other out, get frustrated with each other. There are miscommunications. We're learning how to work with one another through digital platforms, and people can get really funky about that very quickly. And it's out of their own frustration with the team. It can be out of their own frustration with you. And if I could share one thing with you, is as a supervisor, it is your job to keep everybody kind of on the up and up and not call somebody out if they can't be at that meeting, or if someone has to, if you're on a video conference and someone has to turn off the video because maybe they are at home with their children, during this time, or they have to mute during a meeting and can't fully participate in that conversation. It may be frustrating and it may seem very minimal, but it can be frustrating to others. It can be frustrating to you, but for you to keep your head up and just always be consistent as far as trusting each other, it will go so much further when it comes to workforce deliverables and workflow processes. The next part of that is remote work rhythm. We take that very seriously. 25th hour, we have over 18 employees, some in each time zone. So it's a little bit funky that we're working virtually, but also that we have so many people in different, setting a team meeting for people that need to be on the East Coast, Central, Mountain Time, West Coast, it can get a little bit tricky. So, just keeping in mind that setting a regular work schedule, just as you would in the office, if I could share that with your employees and just say, yes, we are working from home. Yes, there are some out of the ordinary things happening right now, right? You cannot get to all of your work. Your children are probably home. Their schools are closed. Or maybe you don't have children. Maybe you have unruly spouses and pets at home that are distracting you. All the same, it's very important that you try to keep as much of a regular workflow and work schedule as possible. So what I mean by that is everybody generally should be clocking in or appearing into their inbox or getting ready to start their workday the same time that they should be when they were coming to the office. Same thing goes for when you're starting to unplug and be done for the end of the day. One of the things of working from home that can be difficult is learning when to stop and learning when to unplug, because you're right there in front of all of your stuff all the time. And so what happens is we get some people who take, an hour, maybe 2 hours out of their day because they've had to deal with something, so they're not used to working in that environment. And we often will hear, well, as long as I get the work done, it shouldn't matter, right? It shouldn't matter. It does matter. And the reason it matters is for a few reasons. One is that your team needs to be able to depend on you during regular business hours. And if you are stepping away and then coming back and then stepping away and then trying to come back to it that evening, your employees will burn out. It will feel like they've never really stepped away and had a good amount of time away from their desk. So as much as it may seem as though it's helping them during the day to take that hour or 2 hours away from their desk, coming back and having to make up that time and refocus themselves is actually going to take them close to 4 hours. Not to mention that when they finally come back to their desk, and it's 6:30, 7:30, 8:30, even 9:30 at night, and they are trying to do the work of the day, they no longer can depend on their team because their team should be checked out. And that's going to mess with the workflow and the productivity for the team because, they're kind of trying to check in, that person's not there. Then when the person is at their desk and ready to work, nobody else is there to support them. And it really, really hinders productivity when you're not in that remote work rhythm. So when people we'll get employees and they'll say, we don't want to micromanage you on the time clock, but we also want this to be productive and we want this to work as though it's a regular office, to save them and to save the work for our clients and the work of our company. As far as communication goes, we have a few rules that we abide by at 25th hour. The first one is the to and CC. So anytime that an email is sent out, the to is an action item. If you are mentioned in the to part of the email, there are going to be action items in that email for you. If you are on the CC line of that email, you know that you are being copied. And this is probably very general information, but we would just like to share it again. This is part of our employee onboarding, actually. If you are on the CC line of that email, you are just an FYI. You do not have to take any action. You just need to have it, be aware of it, and then file the email away. And that's a very instant, virtual, and visual cue as to what you need to do just by opening the email and not even reading it, but just being able to see if your name is in the to line, you will have an action item somewhere down in that email. If you're copied on it, then that's just for you to file. As a supervisor, what I require from my team is that when I send things out and I try to combine as many emails as possible into one email. So I will have one email and I will say, hey, Trish, I got your update on this client's project. This looks great. And we're not going across many projects. This is, the same project. Hey, Michaela, can you take care of this? And hey, Maggie, I got your update. I'll send this back to you. I've taken 3 emails and now I've combined it to one email. So I've combined one email to my group. Not only will my team see what everybody else is responsible for, but I can literally send one email and not have to worry about getting 3 different responses back and trying to communicate that process to everyone else on the group. So we do a reply all. When Kristina gives me her updates, she sends them to me. She replies all. Now everybody else in the group knows where that part of the project is at. When I have my update back to the group, I will send that back, and and everybody will kind of be updated. So kind of doing group emails, again, the two in the CC, and then when we assign something out to somebody, one of the things we really like to we really ask for is just a got it. Just a got it. So even though you may not have time to work on that, and even though you may not have time to deal with it at that very moment, just a handoff saying, I got it. So, as a supervisor, what I ask of them, and what I do the same for me, if I'm being tagged in something or if I'm being assigned something, even though I can't get to it, what I'm going to say is, hey, I got it. It's handed off. You don't have to worry about it, and you can kind of, check off that list. That saves me as a supervisor being able to come back around and having to circle the wagons back around again and again. That gives me that opportunity to check it off my list. So just a simple got it. It's a handoff, and I think it helps everybody move through the flow of their day. I agree with John. Google Hangouts, group messaging, that kind of thing is definitely something that's very beneficial to our group. It saves long emails, and it gives you that opportunity to get that information to and from each other in real time. So going on to the next slide. So how do we work through collaboration, obviously from a virtual or a remote environment? So we use collaborative tools such as Google Docs and Google Sheets and Google Slides. This really helps us do real-time versioning. The reason that this is great is because, obviously if you're having 4 or 5 people review one document or make their additions, sometimes the version doesn't get saved correctly, and sometimes people's input gets left out. We'll get to the final version of a report, and when somebody sees it or was copied on it when it went to the client, like none of my changes were made, and it isn't almost an epic fail, kind of going back to that. So, we do real-time collaborative documents. Calendaring, we use Google Calendars, and we make sure that we can see each other's calendar. It's really important just for like this webinar right now. I was able to ping my team and say, hey, I'm getting ready to hop on a webinar. Please, no interruptions while I'm on here. And then they're also allowed to see my calendar. And then we can kind of make those decisions on when is the best time to communicate with one another. Another really great resource that we use that's not listed here is Loom, L-O-O-M. And with that, we're able to, use this screen recording video capture. And it's really great. It's a plugin for Chrome. And what you would do is that basically you can start the video recording and you can record what's on your screen. So what's great about that is that sometimes an email just does not capture what you're trying to do. So if you're working on big projects, reports, print projects, campaigns, meetings, any of that, it just gives us an opportunity to share our screen and say, hey, Jim, this is what I'm talking about. I need you to move this over here. I need you to move this over here. I go ahead and save the video. It gives me a link. I can email the link to my team or to whoever needs to watch it. And then when they've watched it, I'm actually have an opportunity, it will send me a notification when the video's been watched. So these are just a few tools that have been really great for our teams. And the other thing too about being collaborative, when we do have large meetings or when we have worked through a lot of details in some of our in some of our group large meetings, and we've worked through big project details, within, I would say 15 to 30 minutes after that meeting, I will go ahead and send an updated email to the entire group. And I will summarize exactly what I felt the takeaways were, what the assignments are out of that. And as a supervisor, I kind of take that on and I do it, within a 20 to 30 minute window, and make sure that, I can give back to the team exactly what my expectations are. So those are kind of collaborative pieces. Again, I want to be conscious of everybody's time, so I'll work through this last segment fairly quickly, and then we can kind of open it up. So if anybody's done strategic coach or any of those kind of programs that kind of help build supervisors up, we really focus on check-ins, focus, and strategy, or some would call maybe, buffer, that kind of thing, buffer time. So we limit our check-ins as small team meetings. So I work with my digital marketers. We do a 15-minute check-in on Friday. We do a 15-minute check-in on Monday for the graphic designers. We keep it to the point. We bring our outline and our bullets to the meeting, and we promise each other that we will not go over that 15 minutes unless it's absolutely needed. So, that's something. And then as far as client meeting goes or any other team meetings, those used to be on our calendar for an hour at a time. And, 5 meetings, that's 5 hours out of your week. And we're just learning that we're dying by, death by committee, death by meeting, and it really bumps into our productivity. So as a rule of thumb, we try to present 70% of our work schedule throughout the week on focus, which is head down, trying to get the work done. 20% of that time we try to focus on strategy. So that is, how will we get the work done? So that's looking at your calendar, looking at what's coming next week, looking at what deliverables, what reports, what kind of things do I have to provide to not only my team, my boss, my CEO, my president, and my clients. What kind of time do I need to put aside to make sure I can meet those deliverables? And that's strategy about 20% of the time. We really try to save just a little bit less or more than 10% of the time for meetings. We're really trying to be more collaborative, work smarter, not harder, and kind of go from there. Now, with that, I do want to touch a little bit on, flexibility, and that goes back to trust. I think that there absolutely has to be trust, and there you have to be able to offer flexibility, especially with this new normal. So, tying back to regular work hours, I just want to, touch back on that of course we're in this together, and this is new for a lot of people. But with that being said, a lot of people that are working in office situations or working in higher education or are commuting to these regular jobs have a regular work schedule. So whatever that work schedule is, over time, it will be beneficial for you to stick as closely to those work schedules as possible. So I just kind of wanted to touch base on that. So meeting durations, like I said, trying to really limit those, giving yourself focus and head down time, and then strategy, and that's our 70-20-10 rule. So that's the end of my information and slides, so I'll just go ahead and I'll let you guys open the floor for questions.
Great, Crystal. Thanks so much. And again, if you do have questions, you can still type them into the Q&A box, but I'll go ahead and start reading them. Our first question is, I've seen articles about employee monitoring software. Do I need to be worried if my employees are actually working and not Netflix and chilling?
So this is Kristina. I think my response would be that if you have that level of concern, you probably have hired the wrong employees. And I know that seems really crass and rather harsh, but I would like to think that, we build a rapport and a level of responsibility within the kind of work that we do. And I will note that that's probably to a great degree the level of individuals that I have managed have been at the professional level in terms of, advisors, counselors, and folks of that nature. But I would not support doing any kind of I don't know, spying is the word that's in my head. But no, I would not encourage that.
Do any of the other presenters want to comment on that? Okay, if not, I will go on. Do you recommend or have any of you, oh, sorry, I read that wrong. Do you recommend or have any of you gathered your staff for a fun virtual chat as like a team building session?
This is Crystal, and I can kind of chime in a little bit. So Tuesday afternoons over lunch, as close as we can get to lunch, because we have we have East Coast and West Coast and everybody in between. We try to do a team meeting Again, we limit it to less than 30 minutes, try to get it over the lunch break, make sure that nobody else has any calls scheduled over it. The first thing we do are shout outs. So we give an opportunity company-wide for us to shout out to each other, anybody that's done some really great work for the week. It can be from anybody from a graphic designer to the president can do a shout out. It's just giving yourself an opportunity to do that. We share funny memes. We rename ourselves in Zoom, like what's your favorite baseball player, what's your favorite Thanksgiving dessert, those kinds of things, just to really lighten the mood, and also make any announcements for the week that are company-wide and that are not, employee or group specific.
Yeah, and similarly, we've done a few different things. I've seen where we had a staff meeting where we were able to celebrate people's birthdays. Everybody brought a snack, for example, and so for the first 5 minutes or so, we were able to have it be a little bit lighter in that way. We've also done quite a bit in Slack in terms of creating more recreational channels. So, for example, having people share things that they're really grateful for right now. And then company-wide, we actually did a couple of things like post a picture of your newest coworkers, where people were able to share pictures of their pets and their kids and, things like that, that again, keep some of that, I refer to it as sort of that water cooler vibe, that light, fun element that happens in the office that's so hard to translate now that we're all working remotely. So I think a couple of strategies like that can be really effective.
That sounds so much fun. I think I'm going to have to talk my boss, Brian, into doing something like that. The next question is, how do I help my employees avoid burnout when there is now more a possibility to always be on?
I can speak just a little bit to that. I think the important part of not experiencing burnout is just simply being able to take a break. Obviously, midday is a great time to get up, step outside, get a breath of fresh air, get something to eat, to drink, all that kind of things, and just take a break. Everyone should be entitled to a break. It's easy to be always on, but I think just a well-communicated opportunity to just be away from the keyboard and mouse for maybe some 15-minute opportunities, or maybe a lunch break is well placed within their workday, depending on what their workload is.
I'd add to that too that it's also really important right now to have those check-ins with your team members. So really just trying to get a gut check. A lot of the time, as I think it was Crystal mentioned, we may not necessarily know what's going on. There may be some assumptions. Oh, well, they don't have kids, so them working their normal 40 hours is easy, or asking them to step up and work 50 or 60 hours because we're all working from home anyway. We can make some assumptions like that, but really we need to hear what is going on for our team members at home. Maybe they're caring for somebody who is sick. Maybe they're just mentally struggling with the current circumstances. Anxiety is just taking off for so many people. So really trying to stay human and keep connected into the reality of our team members' lives.
Great. Our next question is, are you encouraging well-being, or should I leave this to HR?
This is Crystal. Absolutely. We are trying to always, so we have, one of the things that we issued, even though this is something we do regularly, so this isn't necessarily our new normal, one of the first things our president and CEO did was put together a list of resources available for such things like Kristina just talked about, with anxiety, dealing with the uncertainty of how things are in our world right now, fun things, healthy things, mental health resources, food resources, anything that we could kind of pull together to just help people and let them know that we're here for them and to support them. So like I said, some of it was fun and relaxing, and some of it was, if you need to talk to somebody, here's, this, these services are offered through our HR plan. Here's the benefit. But as president and CEO, those things were offered, and we were also asked as supervisors and vice presidents to really continue the flow of that information, check in with people, and also encourage the employees, if you see something that looks like it would be great or really beneficial to the other team members, let us know. I know some of these, there's discounts like on the Calm app, and telemedical and telehealth, appointments, and there's like all these things happening right now. And we really work together just at our end to share those with the employees.
Great. Do any of the other presenters want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that, I would never just leave it right to HR. Right now, they're dealing with so much in terms of making sure that we have the right policies in place, handling all the telework agreements and, trying to support folks in that way that I think it's really something that we all need to embrace as part of our own responsibility and service to our team members.
Okay, I'll move on to the next question. Any thoughts about conducting remote virtual performance evaluations?
This is John. I'll speak
Definitely.
just a little bit to that point. Video conferencing is a great opportunity to meet one-to-one. I think on the performance evaluation front, it provides you essentially a private meeting place to conduct those. I don't know that I would recommend phone conversation in that case because the inflection and tone can get lost in that, certainly not via email, but I would highly recommend video conferencing in that situation.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. What recommendations do you have for supervisors when a staff member is not present at a morning Zoom meeting and does not notify beforehand or for over an hour after the meeting ended?
So this is Crystal. We require that if you are not going to attend a meeting, that if there was anything at that meeting that you were to be, that you would be associated with you, that you were to be providing updates, to your supervisor before the meeting is going on. Now, someone just to be a no-show and then not hear from them up to an hour afterwards, again, that kind of goes with that, expectation. I know we've talked about, Kristina and John both have talked about expectations. And yeah, that's just not acceptable. It's a big no-no for us, and we would kind of request an explanation.
Yeah, and for the most part, I would agree too. I think my counselor side shows a little bit though, in that my first response would be, is everything okay? Check in with them, make sure that there wasn't any kind of emergency that had arisen. Don't start with the assumption that something was malicious, but start with a much more open heart because these are just crazy times that things are just changing really, really fast. So start there. But again, it's not acceptable to just simply not show up in the same way that it wouldn't be appropriate to just not show up to work on time. So yeah, I would definitely address it with them, but I would start with the question of what's going on.
Yes, I agree with you, Kristina. Absolutely.
Okay, I'll move on to the next question. How high should expectations for productivity be when a majority of office activities are canceled or dependent on being in the work facility?
Well, this may be an opportunity to share with you a little bit about what Jefferson College is doing in this case. We have put together a bit of a panel, and the name of the product escapes me at the moment, but what we're trying to do is engage employees that may be dependent on work in the office or on campus, in the facilities, to engage in things that maybe are traditionally not associated with their role, in the hopes of working. There it is right there, Bobby, thank you. Trello. Trello is the name of that product. Trello is what we're using. And it allows people to collaborate towards a common goal in terms of a task. So if you're doing, say, a call-a-thon to students, for instance, that might be a product, or might be a situation where all the people can pile on, then you can divide up the number of students you want to reach based on that. Now, setting expectations for that, you just simply have to be flexible in that arrangement because there's so much so much going on and so much information changing daily that it's good to know your employees in terms of what their actual capabilities are.
Okay, I will move on to our next question. Any thoughts regarding how to manage generational differences when they have problems with technology?
Kaylin, this is Crystal. I can tell you, and I don't know that it's absolutely always generational, but what I can say is that people are pretty specific about the type of way they like to communicate. I have a handful of employees that really enjoy using the Hangouts option. I have some that want to give me updates via text, because maybe they're on a Mac and it's easier for them just to throw their text messages in their iMessage. I have some employees that would rather not use Google Hangouts or any sort of instant messaging, and they really just stick to their email. For me, it's most important for me to make myself accessible on whatever platforms work best for my staff and employees. Not to be saying that I need to be circling and swirling around from every different platform, communicating with each employee as they see fit. But I really have a good feel for how people like to communicate. And like I said, I want to be accessible on as many platforms as possible. So as a group, I try to set those expectations and say, hey, as a group, when we meet, this is where we need to meet and this is where we need to be. But opening up and just being flexible with what works for folks, I think is important.
And just to piggyback on that, I think another piece too is that we really want to keep in mind an accessibility perspective. So for example, I was on a meeting earlier today where somebody was sharing a Word document and there were a number of folks online who said that they couldn't see it. The print was too small on their laptops. So whatever we can do to share out things that we're going to be discussing in advance of a meeting, I think that can be incredibly valuable to make sure that people have the same capability to access that. I think, again, trying to help people become more comfortable or perhaps making some of the technological pieces that might be a little frustrating more fun. Slack is a great example. Like I said, it's a tool we use on a regular basis over at EAB, but there are some really fun attributes with it. So if you aren't on Slack, then you might be missing out on those things. So that can be a great incentive for introducing people to a new technology.
All right, well, that was our last question. If you have any, you still have time. I'm going to do a quick closing. So if you do have a last minute question, please don't be discouraged. You can still type it in and we'll get to it. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and a huge thank you once again to our presenters. They jumped in on this opportunity to share their expertise and worked quickly to get the information to us. They were absolutely great to work with, and we really appreciate them. We will be sending a recording of today's webinar to everyone that registered via email. Please take the session survey that will also be in this email. It helps us to develop these programs for our members. You can find recordings of our webinar series on our website, mccatoday.org, and click on the coronavirus banner at the top of the page. You can feel free to share these with anyone. They're complimentary to all. Please reach out to us if there's any other way we can serve you during this time. We have also created an online forum you can access through your member portal. You can share and gain useful resources at this time. Again, you can share today's experience on social using hashtags MCCA webinar, Better Together, and COVID-19. Thank you all once again, and have a great day.